Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Gaming with me, Tony Mo, and we're going to have a little bit of a Star Citizen discussion today. We're going to talk about playing Star Citizen with a Hotas setup. This is something I touched on in the past, and of course there's been a lot of changes and a lot of updates to the way the ships handle, and the way that all of the different controller inputs, whether it be mouse and keyboard, gamepad, or Hotas, function inside of Arena Commander, inside of Star Citizen. Things have definitely gotten better, alright? I mean, back in the early days of SC and the early days of Arena Commander, it was a nightmare to play with the Hotas. I can't ever think of struggling more inside of a game with my X52 than I did in the early days of Star Citizen. So the game has improved quite a bit. And you can see I'm just mucking about in free roam because, to be honest, I haven't ran my Hotas in SC in probably about, 5 or 6 months. So I thought it was time to kind of jump back in and see how things were coming together and see if I still was going to have a lot of the concerns that I've had, since the early days. Things that I always felt were an issue no matter how much you personally tweaked your Hotas settings and no matter how much the team over at CIG tweaked the way that the Hotas worked inside of Star Citizen. And I have to say, some of those concerns are still there for me. And a lot of it comes down to the precision shooting part of controlling a ship with the Hotas. I think general flight, mucking about, even doing some pretty slick maneuvers, the Hotas is alright. So is the gamepad. They work just fine. You can do those sorts of things. But when you start talking about engaging in a combat situation, a situation that requires you to be extremely precise and to chase moving targets such as the Vandal inside of Vandal Swarm, that's where the issue starts to come into place. And a lot of it has to do with the way that yaw is handled. I've talked about this in the past, and we're going to have this discussion at least a couple more times, I imagine, before Star Citizen goes into full release. Now, for many people, you're either running your yaw on your Hotas setup in one of two ways. You're using the twist of your joystick, or you're using pedals. I personally do not have a set of pedals yet. It's something I've been planning on purchasing, and I still have not found the time or budget to go ahead and do so. So, twisting the stick has been my only option as of now. I've considered doing some other things, and I've messed about with a lot of different layouts, even using secondary joysticks on the throttle setup, but that really still is the best way. The issue with that is when yaw is such a precision tool for aiming, it starts to make that a very difficult controller input to use precisely and accurately because it's a twist, because there is a snapback to it. This isn't, it's just an odd way to try and aim a ship and to do it with precision. It's different when you look at games where Hotas is normally used, like DCS, whether you're flying a helicopter, you're flying fixed wing. Yaw is important, but it's something that you use in tiny inputs for very specific maneuvers, and it doesn't provide the same level of input that it does in a game like Star Citizen, which is going for that full 6 degrees of freedom in movement. Which means, of course, that you can rotate your ship on the yaw axis, on the y-axis, extremely rapidly, 360 degrees if you wanted to do so. So there's a lot of input that twist of that stick has to deal with, and it simply does not work out. Which is why using the gamepad, a dual joystick setup is, almost preferable for me. And a lot of people have talked about how a dual joystick setup would actually probably work for, sort of an actual Hotas. If you actually had 2 joysticks instead of a throttle and that, it would probably be a better option. But, I've yet to actually deal with something like that. So that's kind of out of the question. The average Hotas user, and when you look at the Hotas that they just recently announced that they're making specifically for Star Citizen, these are throttle and joystick setups. So, while I found, things felt better, right? In the most recent patch 1.6, things felt better. I had a lot of fun flying my Gladius around, just kind of mucking about in free roam, Again, I was just trying to, I was shooting at the landing pad. I was really just doing some personal tests to try and feel how things felt. And this was all on standard. I hadn't messed with any of the sensitivity curves. I haven't started to tweak any of that stuff. Because for me personally, when you look at players, that immersion factor and allowing them to use things like a Hotas setup, this is something that I hope CIG eventually tunes themselves, so we don't have to really muck about with it. I mean, there's always going to be custom key bindings, and certain people are going to do custom changes to the way their Hotas setup runs just from personal preference, but most of the games that I play with the Hotas, including DCS and Elite Dangerous, which handles Hotas controls very well, a lot of that has to do with the way that they handle the flight system in Elite, those games don't require any modification to any of my profiles on my X52. I don't have to set up custom sensitivity curves. They just work. Hell, even Arma just works really well. So I think Star Citizen, I hope that Star Citizen and the team of CLG will get to some sort of semblance of that when we start to move, you know, closer to release. But for me, as much as I love the immersion factor of flying with my Hotas, I don't think I'll be doing that when I know that I'm going to be in a heavy combat situation. I will very much probably trade it up for mouse and keyboard or the gamepad. That being said, every other aspect of Star Citizen, and frankly all of the aspects that I look forward to most, simply involve, you know, like just going out and exploring and doing things. You know, like they demonstrated just recently at Gamescom with the multi-crew ship. Yeah, there was combat, somebody was flying, but you know, a lot of that was like, let's go out to this asteroid field, let's EVA, let's explore the spaceship. So, you know, it's not like you're forced into combat in Star Citizen. That is not a huge part of the game, and I think that I will have a lot more fun playing my game, you know, playing my personal Star Citizen experience when I'm outside of those direct combat situations. You guys know I've talked about, you know, playing as a bounty hunter, doing sort of a stealth bomber role. A lot of those things don't actually require a lot of precision aiming. Yes, they require some precision flight, but as I've said, I think that that is something that I am fully capable of doing with the current Hotas setup. It really is that precision aiming of something like a minigun. Anything when you start talking, you know, fixed beam is where I think the issue starts to lie. The other discussion, you know, I know that we've had many times before, is the idea that you are going to be transitioning into first person, probably pretty frequently inside of SC. So I think that I would still end up just going with the Hotas and then switching over to a gamepad when I was in first person, rather than leaning over onto the keyboard and mouse, because that's just the way my desk setup currently allows for that. So while I do feel that I am having a little bit of heartache with the way that the Hotas is still being handled, the game is still exceptionally early on. You guys know I just like to give little progress reports on how I feel about certain things like this, and let's just say I got bored with testing at this point in the video, and I decided I was just going to EVA all the way out to that giant, like, mining laser, which you guys will see that I actually used as a thumbnail for this video. I got a really awesome close-up of it. And, Star Citizen. Yeah, that's Star Citizen for you. So, really what I want to ask you guys to go ahead and end this video, I know it was a more brief discussion than usual, but it was just, like I said, I want to do a little bit of an update on my thoughts on the Hotas. Overall recap, things have improved, they've gotten better. I hope that CIG continues to tweak. It does seem like a lot of the developers are playing with gamepads, probably because, let's be honest, that's what's most convenient. When you have a massive, you know, desk loaded with stuff going on, you've got paperwork, you've got multi-screens, you've got code up. Having a Hotas sitting around at your workstation, probably not the most reasonable thing, but I imagine there are some people over at CIG who are using the Hotas, and I think that, you know, you get a good sense of the way that that team works, you know, all the teams work, and that I imagine communication is very important. And I can see one of the devs, you know, who's in, you know, the gameplay mechanics department, sitting over there with this Hotas where everybody else is in mouse and keyboard and gamepad, and he's just screaming at everyone, "We've got to fix this! This needs to be better!" So I'm rooting for that guy, you know, and I hope that eventually we have some really solid Hotas support that requires little to no modification by the user. If you guys have been playing with Hotas recently, I'm talking within the last couple weeks since 1.5 and 1.6 went live, please let me know what your experiences have been. How do you feel about your Hotas? Have you stepped away from it? Did you go back to mouse and keyboard? I really want to hear from you guys. It's nice to kind of get the impact and the feeling, the opinions of other people in a situation like this, because of course I only have one type of Hotas. I have an X52 Pro. You could have, you know, a more modern one, you could have something like a Warthog, and your experience could be completely different for all I know. But I do know that one thing that does stand still is the way that yaw is being handled in Star Citizen, I think will forever be a bit of an issue for Hotas users. Maybe CIG, with all of their magic and intelligence, will find a way to solve that issue. We'll have to see. The future will most definitely tell. So please, as I said, let me know your thoughts, your opinions on the Hotas down in the comment section below. And I will see you somewhere in space, EVAing